I went to the doctor last week, and he said, I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you. You've only got about a year to live. A year to live? A year to live! Oh! Now that's the opening that Carl used 30 years ago in a speech contest where he beat me. And I remember at the time, I'm sitting in the audience, I'm a speech contestant, but I'm thinking, oh my God, he's a dying man. Give him the trophy, give him a break. We don't care about this stupid contest. We love Carl. But as you can see, Carl is still here. Zombie, I don't know. You make your own conclusion. But obviously he's doing pretty well. So the opening is important in your speech. In fact, you've only got 30 seconds to a minute for people to figure out if they're going to listen to you or not. But really, I'm getting ahead of myself. Really, tonight we're going to be talking about speech writing 101, just the basics, because this is going to be a half-day seminar. We're going to try to condense it into about 10 minutes. So the first thing you have to figure out is, what are you going to talk about? What are you going to talk about? Well, probably the easy way to start is start with you. Who are you? What do you know? What's your specialty? What's your job? What are your interests? What are your hobbies? Are you flying airplanes? Are you doing barbecue? What are you passionate about? What do you really care about? If we look at this picture of this good-looking guy up here, bent down in the flowers, he sort of reminds me of Tom Selleck a little bit, don't you? Diane, don't you agree with that?
I don't think so.
Who asked? Okay, Diane, kind of. All right. Well, we at least know one thing about this guy. He likes butterflies. He likes flowers. So that's actually one thing that he could possibly share with the world. So everything that you are and everything that you might become goes into that big black box. Now, the second part of topic selection is your audience. Who is your audience? What are they made up of? Men, women, educated, high school students, kids. What are their interests? What do they want to know about? In fact, they say every audience has one particular radio station that they listen to. That's WIIFM. It stands for What's in It for Me. What do you have to tell me that's going to not only interest me, that might benefit me? So you've really got to consider that when you are working on a topic selection. And the intersection of those two, what you know as a speaker and what the audience is interested in, those are your possible topics. Those are the things that you can talk about. Now here in Toastmasters, we don't care. You can talk about anything, right? But when you get into the big outside world, it's a big deal. When I talk to a gardening club, obviously I'm going to be talking about butterfly gardening. When Brent Stewart says, come over to our Kiwanis Club, well, I'd better not be talking about butterfly gardening, or people will be leaving in droves. They'll be having all sorts of excuses to leave the room. So you've got to know your audience and what your specialty is. In fact, I encourage you to develop some sort of expertise in whatever area you're interested in. Let's figure out, how much time do you need to spend on this? So if you think, well, maybe I'm going to do a 10-minute speech. How much time do I need to do in preparation? Well, my general rule is this. Try to get 3 or 4 times as much material as you could possibly give. So if you're doing a 10-minute speech, try to get 30 or 40 minutes worth of material so that you'll be prepared. When do you start? Well, on your mark, get set, go. You start right now. You gotta put the time in. You got to be prepared. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. I see a lot of speakers coming to Toastmasters at the very last minute, and they're speaking, and what are they doing? They're working on their speech. They're typing things down. They're trying to put together a speech at the last minute, something they should have been working on for 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. So it's definitely a marathon. And I like to think of the speech process, especially at the beginning, as sort of like a butterfly. When you're outside in the summer and you see that monarch butterfly sort of flitting around from flower to flower, well, that's sort of what you want to do as a speaker. You want to go around and try to capture all these different ideas and stories and thoughts that you might be able to use in your speech. But here's the trick. You've got to write it down. You've got to write it down. I've got about 11 computers at home. And here's the one computer, though, that will never fail you. In fact, Alan's got it in his hand. It looks like a pencil back there, a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper. It never quits. It never It gives you that blue screen of death. It always works. So wherever I go, I always carry a pen and paper in my pocket. I got one by my bed. I got one in the bathroom. I got one in the car. So whenever you get an idea for the speech, whenever you hear a story or you joke, you write it down. You write it down. You get that basic idea down. So the second part of this is now that you've got that idea down, you need to develop it. And so you need to start writing that. And I would say writing and speaking every single day. And how do you do that? Well, I would say you can either get up early, get up half an hour early. Maybe you can work on it at lunch. Maybe you can cut down that 3 hours of TV time to 2.5 hours. Find that 30 minutes a day that you can actually start working on your speech where you can be writing. And you want to write in what I call your natural voice, just like I'm talking to you. You don't want to write into that English 101 composition mode where you're afraid that the teacher's going to grade you down because you're not using proper English. In fact, what you can do is actually pretend like you're talking to your best friend and say, here's my story, here's what I want to tell you. And if you can actually use a digital recorder. Probably you've got a phone that can record what you're trying to record, put it there, then actually put it into the computer. When you're writing, here's one thing you need to think about is you need to get a good writer's book. And the book I like is called A Writer Teaches Writing. It's 88 cents. Howard, you can even afford this book. 88 cents. I know you can afford it, Howard. The shipping's $3.99, but you can do it. And here's why I'd like you to get the book, because here's some of the things it says. It says, we write to think, to be surprised by what appears on the page. The writer sits down intending to say one thing, and hears the writing say something different. More or less or completely different, and the writer becomes the reader, wondering what will happen next. We are afraid to fail. Our students are terrified by failure. They've been taught by teachers and parents, the press, and their own instinct that everything must be done perfectly the first time. They are inhibited, constipated, and frightened. Loosen up. Relax. Take a laxative if you have to. You want to relax, get into that writing mode, forget the editor for a while. And so finally we get into stage 3, and that's actually research. You're probably going to want to do some research into whatever topic you want to get into. If it's an interest, you can go to the library, you can get online, you can look at videos. There's 1,000 different ways you can get all sorts of information about your topic. And then you repeat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You keep going through that whole process day after day until you get that 3 or 4 times worth of material that you need for your speech. And at this point, we've been like Mr. Butterfly, just sort of flying around, getting all of these ideas, being spontaneous, creating all this material. But now things have got to change. Now we're going into shark mode. We got to be a little bit more vicious and cynical and critical because we're trying to be that editor. We're trying to change what we've got down. So the first thing you need to do is take all those stories, all that stuff that you've written down, and you need to grade it. A, B, C, D. Alan would love to grade it for you. But here's the thing. A lot of times when we're trying to go through our own material, we say, well, gee, I wrote it. It must be A material. This is good stuff. How can I change that? Well, you try to get somebody who can do a good job for you. You don't want to go to your girlfriend or boyfriend or your best friend, or certainly not mom, because mom thinks everything's wonderful. But maybe you could go to a fellow Toastmaster or somebody that would give you some honest feedback, and you need to grade all of your material because this is what you need to do. You need to get rid of that D material. You need to get rid of that boring stuff and probably most of the C stuff. And you really only want that A and B material because you as an audience, you only want A and B material, right? You don't want the boring stuff. You don't want the average stuff. You want to be excited. You want to be entertained. You want the really good stuff. And then you need to go back and get into that editor mode, get that little red pencil out, a red pen out, and start making all of those grammatical changes and punctuation and make sure that copy is right. Again, try to stay in that natural voice as much as you can so that you've got that story down just right. Of course, we get back to our opening. You want to get people's attention. There's a lot of different ways to do it. The doctor says you've only got a year to live. That's pretty attention getting. Certainly, Carl, you got my attention 30 years ago. I'm still telling that same story. And you also need to start thinking about your closing, because your opening and your closing are two things that maybe your audience really needs to pay attention to. And so I try to have some sort of humor or some way I can tie my closing into what I'm speaking about. And those two things are very, very important. You want sort of your A material in the opening and closing. And then you need to start to get organized. You got all of these stories, all of this information. How do you put it together? Well, you got all sorts of different ways you can organize your material, but try different ways. See what works out, what's logical, what makes sense, what's easy to remember. And humor is also very important. You know, it's nice to have humor in your presentations. This guy here is named Lance Miller. He's a 2005 Toastmaster International World Champion. A little over 7 minutes, he had 23 humorous incidents, humorous jokes, humorous stories. You know, that's 3 a minute. That's pretty impressive. You know, we're certainly not going to get on that level, but try to add some humor into your presentation. Try to get some audience participation. You know, try to ask questions of somebody in the audience. Try to get people to raise their hand, get people standing up. I think Gina had people standing up, participating very, very much so, doing some vocal variety a while back. It's a great way for people to be entertained. They'll enjoy your program much more. So please have audience participation if you can. And as the old joke goes, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And it's practice, practice, practice. And it's practicing not just the words and the stories. That's important. You need to know what you're going to say. But you also need to practice what I call PEFGB. P-E-F-G-B. It stands for posture. How are you standing? You know, you're standing nice and tall and in control, or you're sort of slouching over, maybe on the lectern, going down like this. How's your eye contact? Are you looking at people, or are you looking at your notes? Facial expression. Are you animated? Are you happy? Are you good to be here? Does it show on your face? Gestures. Again, are you using your hands? Are you keeping your hands behind your back? You know, try to practice those sort of things. And finally, body movement. Again, I'm trying not to move too much tonight because we're doing a video. But again, in most situations, you want to move around a little bit and move back and forth. Certainly get away from the lectern if you can. And then finally, what you need to practice is vocal variety. You know, sometimes you want to speak soft. I've only got a year to live. I've got a year to live. Try to add vocal variety, and again, you have to practice it. Now, in closing, probably at some point, some of the people here are saying to themselves, gee, Tom, this sounds like a lot of work to me. I don't know if I want to do all of this kind of work. But I'm going to give you the answer that I give other people when I talk about gardening. You know, I'm a big-time gardener, butterfly gardener, and mostly during the summer, I'm outside in the yard and I'm working in the garden. And people are walking by, and we're having a nice conversation. And usually they'll stop and they say, wow, this is a beautiful garden. It's really lovely. But I guess it takes a lot of work, doesn't it? My answer is always the same. Nope, doesn't take any work at all. But it does take a lot of love. So please, put a lot of love in your speech, and it will be terrific.